Hi, good evening.
Welcome to AfterGlow.
Welcome to AfterGlow.
We're going to hurry through our Havdalah because we have a guest that's going to be amazing.
Yeah, we have a really special guest tonight, Rachel Ferguson, and we've known Rachel before she was born.
Yeah, correct.
So we are delighted that she's joining us, and she's made quite an achievement of herself, and she's written a book. So we're going to get to hear from her and her experience as growing up in a multicultural church, which is what we were always part of. So let's do the brachas.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Amen. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine.
So we do Havdalah to close out Shabbat.
How sweet it is.
It's been, it's kind of a more tart wine. And we like to heighten our senses. We fill a glass of wine all the way full because that represents joy. And then we smell the spices to alert our olfactory senses.
Yeah.
And we're imbibing the goodness of creation as we say goodbye.
For a little while, you got into like essential oils and you get real powerful smells. This is pretty powerful.
It's delicious. Yeah. Okay, so let's say the blessing of the spices.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim.
Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, creator of the different spices. And lastly, I have this pretty little Havdalah set over here.
You know, we need to remember to send Rachel. We have a little Havdalah set.
Yeah, Rachel, we're going to have a little gift for you.
Yeah.
And I didn't bring my cup of water, so I'm going to have to extinguish this tonight in the wine, which is the way you're supposed to do it.
All right.
So we're going to light our Havdalah candle, which is a multi-braided candle. This is blue and white for Israel, of course. And we're going to say the blessings over this candle. And it's creates a huge flame. So I like to do this part quickly.
And I like to say that Jeannie lifts it up like Lady Liberty.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam
borei ma'arei ha'esh. Blessed are you, Lord of God, King of the universe, creator of the light of fire. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol ben or l'choshech ben Yisrael la'amim ben yom hashvi'i l'sheshet yemei hamaseh. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol. And what does that mean in English?
Blessed are you, Lord our God,
King of the universe,
who separates
between the holy and the profane, between the light and the dark, between Israel and other nations, between the seventh day and the 6 days of the week. Blessed are you, Lord, who separates between the holy and the profane.
Okay. Okay.
She's trying to put out the Havdalah candle.
Okay.
Very
Listen,
important.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Let me just quickly turn on our banner and get ourselves set up.
That way you can maybe participate in the chat.
Yeah, we welcome you to chat. Of course, you can find us on Messianic Lamb Radio. Look for AfterGlow. And we're also on Facebook and YouTube.
We're back out of YouTube jail.
Out of YouTube jail. So now I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Ferguson. Let me bring her on and hi Rachel.
Hello.
Hi. Let me give the proper introduction. Rachel is the director of the Free Enterprise Center at Concordia University, Chicago. She is assistant dean of the College of Business and professor of business ethics. She is an affiliate scholar at the Acton Institute and co-author of the new book about to be out in May, Black Liberation Through the Marketplace, Hope and Heartbreak and the Promise of America. Her commentary has been featured at the Christian Post, the Acton Power blog, Discourse Magazine, Law and Liberty, Econ Lib, and the Online Library of Liberty. And Rachel, thank you for being here. That was quite an introduction. What is...
I pre-ordered your book, Rachel.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I always like to say to my audiences, you can pre-order on Amazon right now.
We're going to put that up for folks. Rachel, we have known you like pre-utero. You know, we've known your parents. Rachel's parents are the founders of Clayton Community Church, which is where Jake is a pastor now. And they came initially, the church grew out of a youth group geared to reach Jewish kids with the gospel. It was a youth group called Kibbutz, and Rachel was practically born there. And so I first question I have for Rachel, we're gonna get into your book and what you're passionate about. I do want to ask you about how you were raised, being raised in this multicultural, which was a big buzzword back then. Do we still use that term much?
Well, when we're talking about churches, the term tends to be multi-ethnic. So, you have immigrant churches, you have the traditional Black church, you have white evangelical churches, and then you have, within evangelicalism, I should say, then you have multi-ethnic churches. So there's a big, really interesting conversation going on right now about the relationship between traditional ethnic churches and multi-ethnic churches. So that's something we could talk about if you wanted to.
Okay. Yeah. But I do want to ask you about what it was like for you to be raised in that environment, in a multicultural, multi-ethnic church, and how it formed your thinking and made you, if it did, drew you into the field you're in now, and what you're passionate about now. So we want to hear a little bit about your background, your thinking, and then of course about your book.
Boy, that's an interesting question. So I have an answer, but I have to make sure everyone knows how I'm using certain terms. So in the traditional American sense, or the recent, I guess I should say, American sense, we talk about conservatives and liberals, right? And there's this great work that's come out. You guys may have heard of it, The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a psychologist who has made Flash. Is the head of something called heterodoxy.com. And it's all about getting different voices in the university. And one of the things that he points out in this book, The Righteous Mind, is that certain kinds of personalities can move in the direction of certain kinds of politics. And so a conservative could, and it'll all relate back to your question. Just give me 1 sec.
No, go. Go.
So a conservative might be more focused on conscientiousness, which is the personality attribute that has to do with sort of order and security, right?
Yes.
And then what we call a liberal would be more openness, right? Where it's like, hey, anything goes, it'll all be fine. Okay, so it's, you can see how people can be drawn to one or the other.
Right.
And what's interesting to me now, I actually use the term liberal in the philosophical sense, which means something different from how it's used in America. So actually anywhere else in the world, Europe and other places, when you say liberal, people think free market actually in the rest of the world. And that's because liberalism is sort of the individual rights approach.
Right.
So political liberalism as a philosophical term is actually referring to what we might call classical liberalism or libertarianism. But all of that to say, there's still a liberal impulse to it, right? The idea that you're trading across borders, right? And you're trusting that people will, just protect their rights and they'll get together and they'll do good things. You know what I mean? And you're so that's the political philosophy I ended up pursuing, over the last 25 years. And I do think my upbringing had a lot to do with it. being accurate if I say that our church, when I was a kid, which would have been in the 80s, was maybe a third Gentile Christian, a third Jewish Christian, and a third, or I should say white Gentile Christian and black Christian.
Yeah.
Something maybe I don't know if I'm overstating, but that's
you're probably overstating the Jewish.
The Jewish portion. We're always a minority.
Okay. I think it's like
a lot about it,
but a much larger minority than would be in the greater culture. Jewish people are 1%, 2%.
Yeah, and with me going to the Jews for Jesus in gatherings and having Sandy Weltman as my uncle, basically, I was probably a little overestimating the Jewish representation. Yeah. But the point is that it was very multi-ethnic, and just for your audience, we had a lot of internationals too. It wasn't unusual to have Nigerians dancing to the front to present the offering, and things like that was just totally normal. Missionaries from India and all kinds of places, and we had them in our home and for dinner.
And all socioeconomic backgrounds too.
Yes,
all the counties, and until we made those baby churches, we were hefty.
No, that's really true. I actually was just talking on Twitter the other day about someone was the fact that that people stereotype Black people as poor, when in fact Black Americans are generally doing quite well. We have issues with a certain minority who's in poverty, but they were kind of complaining about it, and I said, yeah, actually, I think the richest guy in our church when I was a kid was Ron. Rich is a black guy who was very successful in sales, and he used to be bothered by how shabby I was, and he would take me shopping. He and Lisa would take me shopping.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Because I got everything out of the kind of the missionary bag or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, so no, it was true. Really socioeconomic, big spread.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. Lots of ways
really
of life.
just all parts of town.
And bikers. I mean, we had
remember the bikers?
Yeah, you know what? Interesting, Rachel. We just had Ron and Lisa on.
That's right.
Yeah,
and I keep up with Ron. I text him my articles and things like that.
Oh, that's awesome.
He's interested in my work. But anyway, all of that to say, I do think that it was such an open feeling, to our church, that everyone was welcome and we were interested in your culture, and we sang in different languages. We sang in Hebrew and we sang in Spanish, and we even got up and danced, and it was just very open. And so I think there is a part of me that, in that classical sense of the term liberal, I am like that. I'm not like a fear-based person when it comes to thinking through politics, even though I am socially a conservative person.
That's really interesting to hear it framed that way and articulated clearly, because
and every society needs both, right? You need some people who are worried about order and some people who are pushing for openness.
Yeah. That's so interesting. So this led me to think about your experience leading up to the book's topic, which is Black America, right? Black liberation. Okay. I'm really curious. I don't know much about it, but not only were you exposed to a multicultural environment in church, your family lived, housed, fostered several African American kids, right? Alongside you guys. Perhaps that opened your eyes, or that led your heart to this topic. I don't know. It's just a question.
No, it's absolutely related. Absolutely related. And of course, what kibbutz became was the inner city ministry. So it started out as the Jewish ministry. And then, even though the inner city ministry was called Jubilee, we all just kept calling it kibbutz.
To this day. Charlie in our house today. Yeah.
That's right. And so, that was kibbutz. And I was not only, were my foster brothers, Matt and Tommy, who lived with me in my childhood 2 or 3 years at a time each. And also, we continued to have a relationship with them after that. And as you guys know, they were both at the burial of my mother and my father. And Matt, especially, I thought what he shared at my mother's burial was very moving. But I was also driving in on Thursday nights because my mom ran the teenage boy Bible study. Yeah. And so I was driving in and picking up kids and, hanging out. Right. And so I was on Theodosia Avenue. I'm a kid from Olivet, little bit working class, but I'm going to Ladue, right? So I'm doing pretty good. I don't know how many kids at the Ladue School District were hanging out on Theodosia Avenue on a Thursday night, but I don't think it was too many.
Rachel, do you remember the morning when all the church was bussed down to there?
I don't.
Look at the property.
Well, when we purchased the property, sort of like to dedicate it. And people were not warned ahead of time. They just had the buses all set up and we all left.
Yeah.
It was great.
She was probably a little girl.
Yeah.
So I don't recall that. But anyway, so I would say, both of my foster brothers were in and out of the criminal justice system. And so I got to see a lot about that. And I also got to look at what, sort of the struggles were for inner city people and, what the poverty issues were in that arena. And I knew pretty quickly that the government interventions that we were bringing to impoverished people were not fixing it, right? I mean, they were not fixing it. And in some cases seemed to be creating perverse incentives and making things worse. And so that was very apparent to me when I was young. It wasn't like an ideological thing. It was just an observation. You know what I mean?
It wasn't making things better.
It wasn't making things better. But I was also seeing a lot of problems with the criminal justice system as well. And the way that became a kind of endless cycle. And there weren't necessarily any good solutions there either. Yeah. So I was pretty open to a lot of the sort of classical liberal insights about the way that government programs can create perverse incentives. That's like a big theme, right? In that crowd. Yeah. And then, but also the way that the state can overstep.
Yeah.
And so once we started really talking in earnest about things like the mass incarceration crisis and the drug war and things like that, I was already like, okay, I know what I was sort of like, I'm not totally a stranger to these topics. So, I was thinking early on, I think the group that has the toughest time in the United States is the Black American male. Yeah. What can we do? What can we do? And I've always been sort of driven by that question nagging at me in the back of my mind as I went through my PhD and dissertation and other things. So finally got to really write about it. So.
Okay. Yeah, because when I think, Rachel, I've just seen a little, I've seen you kind of move up, but I understood that you were a philosophy professor, so Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and, all the great French. That's what I think of when I think of philosophers. And then here you are and getting into the economic side of free enterprise side of economics. So this is a whole new area that has blossomed for you. And
no, I wouldn't put it that way. Okay. So I'm a classic philosophy professor. I can teach, I can teach Plato, I can teach Plato's Republic, but what do you read? I mean, what did almost every schoolboy read if they went to school in England or something, right? Like, what did Tolkien read as a kid? They all read Plato's Republic, or they all read Aristotle's Politics. Political philosophy and thinking about the economic system is basic to philosophy, right? So you have ethics, you've got political philosophy as a kind of subset of ethics. And so no, I mean, that was actually always my area of concentration.
Okay.
I think my understanding, Rachel, is that back when Ferguson kind of blew up, that you were at Lindenwood and you practically got students and businesses and stuff involved with each other in a real practical way. And that maybe that got you involved more with all this stuff. Is that possible?
Yeah, no, it did. That's right. So what was that? 2015, right? Was the Ferguson unrest,
death of Michael Brown.
Okay. So 2014.
Yeah.
And so by then I had already started the Liberty and Ethics Center at Lindenwood University, which was part of a Free Enterprise Institute. I was already thinking about criminal justice reform type issues. And so that was not foreign to me in any way. But I really, truly, when it came to Ferguson, the place, which was 10 minutes from my house, and then on the other side, 10 minutes from my university, I wanted to support the entrepreneurs. I never forgot those butchers, that butcher shop right on the main avenue that spray painted on their wall, "We did not kill Michael Brown." Right? I mean, Black-owned butcher shop, like, don't burn us down,
Wow.
And so I thought, these entrepreneurs were putting this stuff all over the news, like, don't go to Ferguson, it's dangerous. And that wasn't true. It blew up briefly, but it's a great part of town, wonderful people, a diverse neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so I started a hashtag, Ferguson Favorites, and tried to get everybody to shop there. And then we started providing student interns for the city government. Yeah. So stuff like that.
Okay. Cool.
I like that. Old Town Donuts.
Oh, nice. I'm a Kathy's Kitchen gal, but I also love Ferguson Brewery.
I don't know Kathy's Kitchen. So Rachel, let's talk about the book. You gave me a brief outline. Let's talk. I'm interested in how, have you pretty much told us what has led you to that, to this book? And
I haven't told you the last piece.
Okay.
And so the last piece that put me over the line to write a book is a friend of mine, Patrick Walker, asked me to help get the Black Student Union students to visit the new Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. of African American history.
Yeah.
And culture. And I thought that was a great idea, but if I was going to provide money for it, it had to do with my mission. And so I said, Patrick, if you gave me 5 weeks of your social justice course, I could talk about a version of a way of approaching Black history that's actually a classical liberal, kind of a minimal government perspective. And I said, you don't realize how many insights actually that classical liberal and libertarian scholars have on race and discrimination. People don't necessarily know that. And he goes, okay. So he did
5 weeks of his class.
Yeah. Well, it was the social work class. So it was another professor, but they gave it to me.
Oh, nice.
And so I created this whole lecture series where I went through some of these really unusual things that people don't know. And ways of understanding the history that are classical liberal in nature. And once I started talking about that lecture series, people were like, you need to write this up. You need to write this up, And so that's when I slowly but surely, and a lot of encouragement from people, it was like, why don't you just write a book? And the idea with the book is to collect all those insights into one place and really walk people through chronologically, looking at all of these insights.
Okay. Now, is Patrick a co-writer?
No, Patrick was just my colleague, and he was a wonderful Black colleague, Christian man, who actually very sadly died of cancer just last year. It was absolutely devastating. I talk about him in my acknowledgements because he was very young.
Was he a young man?
He was 48.
Yeah,
very, very young.
Sorry to hear that. So he was a Lindenwood professor?
Yeah, Lindenwood professor. And he was just wonderful. Because I cared about Black issues. And so he used to call me Harriet Tubman, which is ridiculous. But it was totally ridiculous. But we disagreed on who we would vote for. We wouldn't necessarily vote for the same person, but we cared about Black issues, and we cared about Black people making money and really being included in the economy. So we had a ton in common.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that. Okay. Well, here's a nice picture from Amazon of your book. Will be out May 10th.
May 10th. That's right. And we put it out in paper books, so it could be $18 and easy for everybody to access. It's written for a popular audience, so don't be intimidated. Pick it up.
I like how colorful it is. Is that Jacob Lawrence?
That's Jacob Lawrence. Yes.
And
I was so excited when his estate agreed to let us use it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. That's no small thing, I'm sure.
He loved painting builders.
He did. He did workshops and
it's a Messianic show, right? So is there any connection between the price of the book and Jewish things?
Not the price, but there is a connection between.
What I was trying to say is that 18, if you're getting married, you might give some multiple of 18, like 36. 18 is the numerical value of Chai, which means life.
Oh, I used to give all the bar mitzvahs that I went to. I gave them $18 gift certificates. That's right.
Subliminal thing.
Yeah.
No, that's funny. But there is a connection for me with Messianic things in some of the themes that I discuss in the book. And so as I got into writing, you think, oh, you're writing a book on economics and you're writing a book on history. But I very quickly realized I have to have a chapter in here on the Black church. Yeah. None of this is going to make any sense if we don't talk about the Black church, because it really is the cultural womb of Black America. And it's so important to get it right and to understand it. And one of the things that I learned in my research is that one of the insights that I really feel I got from Jews for Jesus, but that the Black church picked up on their own reading of the scriptures, is the emphasis on creation and the goodness of creation. And the idea that we're all made in the image of God. Yeah. And that was so stunning to them, that every human being is a child of God. We're siblings. Absolutely. And there's this inherent dignity and value and so forth. And then it's also the case that the Black church is deeply, deeply rooted in the Old Testament. So, the Exodus story is fundamental, of course. Yes. And also the prophets and the minor prophets and all of their emphasis on the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, right? And so,
justice, Isaiah.
Justice. And, yeah, exactly. And so, my pastor, who's from the Black church tradition, he said, a lot of Black church people think that white church people who think that they are very biblically literate are not very biblically literate because they don't know the Old Testament very well. Yeah. Anyway. And they kind of start with Paul, where the Black church starts with Moses.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so anyway, so I think that resonated with me so strongly as I started learning about it and understanding that the Black church tradition really developed independently of the slave holders who were enslaving them. They were kind of hardly churched Anglicans. They weren't evangelizing. They weren't evangelizing the people they enslaved. The enslaved were being converted by the revivalists, right? During the Great Awakenings. And so
Jonathan Edwards and people like that.
Right. The tent meetings, because the tent meetings would come to you. They'd come to your rural community and they were excited about Black people converting, and they were welcoming and full communion and loved their ecstatic forms of worship, that emerged immediately. And then a lot of Black people who experienced those tent meetings would then go back and convert their family and friends. Wow. This is actually the experience of Frederick Douglass, who was converted by Uncle Lawson, who he adored. He said was the most godliest man he ever met. And he compared him, as a foil to the minister who ministered to his mistress, Mrs. Auld, who he thought was just full of it. This guy doesn't even understand Christianity, and Uncle Lawson really understood it. And so in the minds of the Black church, much of the Christianity that they were seeing among their slave masters, they didn't even really think was real. They really felt like they had a grasp on something, that evangelical kind of Christianity. And they were felt liberated by it and by the message of Exodus and of the Imago Dei, right? Those are all liberatory kinds of messages.
Yeah. Raphael Green, who I mentioned, we'd interviewed before, Bishop Raphael Green. I was looking at his interview, and he was talking about how slave owners denied their slaves the right to read, and they kept Christianity from them. So they were, degraded in that way too.
And after, that's absolutely right. And then after slaves started to become Christians on their own through these Great Awakenings, when they would come back to the plantation, there were these plantation missionaries, and the masters would totally control what they said. And so they would preach on not stealing and obeying the master. And that's all they preached about. They didn't talk about Jesus. And it was very, it was like half the Bible's redacted, in this kind of presentation. And so what Black Christians would do is they would sneak out at night and meet in these called hush harbors, which is where you would kind of have a secret meeting place, and they would even put like a bowl of water. They thought it would soak up the sound, and so they would try to keep it secret. And in the book, I actually include stories of terrible persecution that they underwent from their slave masters who didn't want them to pray and didn't want them to worship on their own and didn't want them to preach.
Well,
and
then
didn't
that
want
would
any of
be
it.
making them individualized. And,
That's right.
And free, basically.
Yeah. Was
There
it
was actually-
more
yeah.
literate through that?
Yes. So just to Jeannie's point, I wanted to say there was actually a fear among the Anglican slave masters that if they evangelized those they enslaved, that they would claim equality, right? And they'd say we should be free. And they were not wrong to think that, because that's exactly what happened. As they became Christians, they're like, you know what, this isn't right, and so it was very dignifying. But then Jake made the point. Sorry, what did you say, Jake?
Remember my point.
I don't remember.
I was trying to get back to whatever you asked, but it was, for me, the point is, the upshot is that there's so much about the Black church tradition that is really its own thing. It's independent from what was going on among the slaveholders. And so it was just a joy to learn about that and to learn about these martyrs.
I was asking about literacy.
Yeah, so that's right. So the minute that emancipation occurred, it was like, we're going to learn to read. Okay, like all good Protestants, you got to read the Bible, right? And that was absolutely right. And so you have people like Mary Peake, serious Christians starting these literacy programs out of the church. They're coming out of the church, and then they're turning into things like Hampton Institute in Virginia, right? And then Booker T. Washington comes out of that, and he starts Tuskegee. Right. And all of this is totally wrapped up with the faith. You can't really separate them.
You don't hear this enough. You don't hear this.
So that was connected with the emancipation and not necessarily even before, when they were becoming Christians. Were they trying to? They
weren't. They weren't allowed to read. So, I mean, that was like illegal. So what they would do is commit things to memory.
And is song a part of this? Music?
Absolutely. Right. So you have spirituals that are huge, quotes, right, from scripture, so that you can remember what it said, or they're like summaries of the stories, right? Ain't you to Daniel God? Ain't you to, and so you're referring back to these stories. And there's of, the pastor holding his hand open, like as though he's reading a Bible, but he's doing it from memory.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, it was very hard to come across scriptures, and it was very hard to be allowed to learn to read. And that was the big amazing story from Frederick Douglass, right? Is that his mistress taught him how to read, or started to. And the master said, you can't teach him how to read. If you teach him how to read, he won't be a slave.
Right.
And it's like such a great statement about education. You can't keep somebody a slave if they know how to read.
Another connection to the Old Testament and the Black church and the Jewish thing is that Shabbat is about creation. It's about honoring when God created the world, and 6 days he created, and the seventh day he rested, and we light the lights, and it's a lot about creation and on it. So I love that there's this deep appreciation of the Old Testament in the Black church. Yeah.
And not to be critical, but just to make it interesting, I do think that one weakness of white evangelical theology is that we tend to start the story with sin. And then we end it. Say it again.
You mean in the garden?
Yeah. So it's kind of like, or just like, let's say you're giving someone the gospel, like the way that I was taught to sort of give the gospel.
Yeah.
It's very common to kind of start with, okay, you're a sinner and you're separated from God, right? And then Jesus died for your sins. So you've got sin and redemption.
Yeah.
The Christian story arc is really creation, sin, redemption, restoration, right? It's a 4-part story, not just a 2-part story. And so I think Black Christians kind of figured that out for themselves, which is awesome.
That is awesome. We do find a lot of people are attracted to the Messianic movement because they do feel like they've lost out on the Old Testament narrative. They feel like they've been robbed a little bit. A lot. I mean, we have, frequently come across that.
Yeah, so, I think that's right. And even just the Gnosticism, if people know that term,
What? What do you want?
Just
excuse me. The wind is so strong.
We're having that's why I got up a minute ago, Rachel.
Oh, okay.
And I can't really get to it. Jeannie needs to get to it, but yeah, keep talking.
So, Jake, would your audience know the term Gnosticism?
Starting with a G, Gnosticism.
Yeah.
Probably,
Possibly,
maybe.
Yeah. So just as a quick gloss, right? You just said there is something that sort of dogged the Western mind, which I love Western civilization, but we have our problems, right? And one of them is Plato. You know, he really separated the body from the soul, right? Or the mind. And it's like the mind or the soul is this pure thing and the body is this bad thing, right? And it turns into Gnosticism, and Augustine was a Manichae, which is a form of Gnosticism before he became a Christian. And so you have versions of Christianity that are kind of like infected with Gnosticism. And it's kind of like the material world is sort of, but because of Jews for Jesus, I never had that.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so it was always like, l'chaim, creation is beautiful and good. It's fallen.
Yeah.
It's fallen, but there's a garden and there's a city that ends it, right? And you see the beauty of it.
I argue that with art too. The argument for art is God created a beautiful world. It's physical, and we get to live in it. We get to inhabit it and play with it.
And I do think that one of the things this has led to in American Christianity, not all American Christianity, right, but sort of the type that I'm critiquing, is a kind of utilitarianism that's very insensitive to beauty. It's sort of like you just have to do what's useful, Yeah. And and so if you're going to make something, it's like kind of you have to put a moral at the end of it or something like that, right? Because you got to make it utilitarian instead of just making something beautiful,
Yes, I mean, even to art suffers a little in the church, right?
Yes, a lot.
Well, it's not just because of the church, but as a believer, you want to do God's will, So you have a choice of so many things, especially in America, right? And as a Jewish believer, I would struggle with the whole idea of representational images and that kind of thing. Especially if they're images of God or something.
Sure.
So I have yet in my whole Isaiah series, I have yet to do Isaiah chapter 6, which is him confronting God. And
how do you paint that?
Anyway, yeah, right, yeah.
But he's working on it, and part of his series is very non-representational, which is beautiful, and we can explain it. And then he's also very figurative, but that's
a different.
But we're always looking for a way to merge art and faith.
I think that we're maybe just on the cusp of making some real progress in this area. Yeah. I don't know how you guys feel about the show The Chosen. Do you like it?
Love The Chosen. Do you not like it?
I love it. I love it. And one of the reasons I love it is because it's well done.
It's well done. It puts feet. Someone asked me recently, how did Jesus do it? How is he so patient? I said, watch The Chosen.
That's right.
It's modeled right there.
And the thing is that the acting is good. The script work is careful, very good, but very creative.
Not super predictable. I mean,
it's not predictable.
Like this could have happened. Right.
Yeah. Matthew being autistic, just some interesting creative choices. And so it's just beautiful. And I feel like evangelical Christians for a long time have not made good art. So not any, but I just mean overall, it hasn't been awesome.
His daughter wrote a book. No, that's How to Be Your Own Selfish Pig. Some books on mediocre. I try to read them all. If you know of any, send them my way. I try to read all the art and faith books.
Yeah. So anyway, I do see in the Black church tradition also a kind of anti-Gnosticism, right? A sort of embrace of earth's crammed with heaven, a sort of seeing the sacred everywhere, looking for God wherever you go. And so that to me also felt like some resonance from the Jews for Jesus background.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Jews for Jesus. Yeah. Life. You know, there's a joy. We work hard, we suffer, but we're going to live a good life too. We're living.
There's a time for feasting.
And we know how to do
people. I mean, the revivalists were so struck by the joy of the Black Christians when they converted, the dancing and the the shouts and the hallelujahs, and they were like, this is amazing. They really loved it. Where the Presbyterians and some of the others weren't so hot on it,
Yeah.
They didn't like it quite as much.
Yeah. Come from England, you're all buttoned up. Well, is there an area in the book you would like to expound on, or do you want to take us through a quick outline, or what would you like to speak about the most? We've got a good few minutes left.
Yeah, 15 minutes.
Yeah, I would say I'm thinking about your audience is believers, and so what would believers be interested in? I think one really interesting section in the book deals with the rise of the progressive era. So I'm using the term progressive there in a very specific way that refers to a kind of scientific approach to the world in which we believe that experts need to be in charge, right? Because modern life is complex, and so you need to have experts. And of course, the classical liberal view is that you need very fundamental rules, and then you need to let people go, right? And let that spontaneous order, that emergent order just bubble up, like you see in very complex economies. And you actually can't really control that, it's in a centralized way, that's kind of a pipe dream, so that's the classical liberal critique of the progressive mindset. But the progressive era was deeply influenced by the rise of Darwin, right? And so you have this notion of sort of the pseudo-scientific ranking of the races. This is real biological racism. So it's almost a new kind of racism that arises in the late 19th century that you actually didn't even have before, where you're trying to ground it in science.
Exactly.
And what they ended up saying, this is just fascinating, but they really thought they could let Black Americans die out. I mean, it's unbelievable that they actually thought this. This was such a huge population.
Were they going to do something
about Margaret Sanger and her?
So Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist, but she wasn't unique. That was extremely popular at the time. So I think people underestimate how popular. There were presidents' cabinets, there were presidents of universities, famous economists, John Maynard Keynes. They were all on eugenics boards.
What was the reason? Did they just believe that they weren't, Black people weren't fully part of the human? It's hard to understand.
Well, wouldn't Darwin believe that people evolved, and maybe certain people were more evolved than other people?
That's right. And so the idea was that the concern was that natural selection is too willy-nilly. It might encourage vice, for instance, because, the evil might rise to the top or something like that. And so they thought, okay, now that we understand evolution, let's shape it ourselves. And if we want to shape it ourselves, and we believe in this pseudo-scientific ranking of the races, then what we need to do is protect the Aryan family. That was the idea. And so we were going to get rid of, like what they called the unemployable, which would be immigrants, Black people. And then they didn't want women and children working because they wanted the Aryan family to be safe, right? And so you wanted the man to be working, you would give him a high wage. So what they came up with was the minimum wage. And this is what really shocks people, is that we think of the minimum wage as something to dignify poor workers.
Right.
But what they were saying is, no, if we raise the minimum wage high enough, no one will hire Black people or immigrants at that rate. We can exclude them from the workforce, and then they can die off. And they had all kinds of ideas about sterilizing and all sorts of things. And we did sterilize epileptics and certain people.
Yeah.
Native American women were sterilized. Actually, Fannie Lou Hamer was sterilized against her will. She went in for what they call a Mississippi appendectomy. And they tied her tubes. And they would do this. They would just do this to Black people.
Yeah.
And Native Americans. And so it was really egregious. I mean, you almost can't believe it when you read it. And they would be straightforward about it. They were like, this is the plan. And it was in like a textbook that people use, you know?
Wow.
And so it was very shocking.
Yeah.
But it not only does it give me a chance to make that history clear, and you can see where that progressive mindset can go so bad.
Right.
But you also see it continue in the redlining policies, for instance, where they had a social engineering mindset. And so you want to keep white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods separate. So the Federal Housing Administration is not going to approve loans for black neighborhoods or for integrated neighborhoods. We're going to send with the GI Bill, we're going to send these white people way out to the suburbs, and then build them a highway to drive to work. And so then once the federal highway system gets going, they actually planned the highway to also separate the black and white parts of town. And then they would plan it to actually run right through the black economic center so that those businesses were destroyed.
Wow.
And the same with what was called urban renewal.
Yeah.
But James Baldwin called it Negro removal, because it was taking communities that may have been poor, but had real social networks, had churches, had schools, and they were just tossing them to the four winds. Yeah. And a lot of it was, number one, a social engineering mindset, and number two, a real disrespect for property rights. They used eminent domain, and they often didn't even compensate people for the value of their home.
So did this literally leave people, black communities in the city? Did it leave people behind? Just left them behind as movement moved west or wherever?
Yeah, out to the suburbs. And so you were trapped in your black neighborhood. You often had to pay a lot for housing because you weren't allowed to buy a house. And so you had to pay these very high rents.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. And then when integration finally started happening, where people were integrating neighborhoods, then the most capable people, the middle and upper class black people, would move out because they wanted to get, like anybody, right? The school district, the space, the land, whatever it is. And then the rest of the black community was left sort of trapped in these ghettoized parts of town, but also isolated by the highway, isolated by their lack of employment networks, et cetera. And so we really kind of created the problem that we have today because we thought we could plan it. We thought we could control the way white and black people interact.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake.
So Rachel, what do you think? Do you feel like there's some hope? Do you feel like there's some things, some policies, some things that can be done? What can we do to? I mean, there's this just so deep, and there's much more we have to learn about it. But what can we do? And are you hopeful?
Well, if you'll notice, the subtitle of the book is Hope, Heartbreak, and the Promise of America. And part of the reason that I'm hopeful is because black people in America who have experienced such a constant set of obstacles and oppression have always been hopeful people. And they have always been hopeful, I think, very much due to their deep, deep and orthodox commitment to the Christian faith. And so I'm taking my cues from them in terms of having hope. I'm also taking my cues from a movement that I call the neighborhood stabilization movement.
Yeah.
So you may have heard of John Perkins. The Christian Community Development Association.
Yeah. I remember him being in St. Louis or meeting him somewhere. Yeah.
And at Cornerstone, we saw Jan Moskowitz and John Perkins riding around on a golf cart. Yeah.
Remember at the music festival?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Should have got a picture. Yeah.
I did Cornerstone for like 6 straight years. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So that attitude of, okay, if we're going to admit that we're in a situation where most Black Americans are thriving, incomes going up, there are different issues, but things are pretty good. But you have 20% of the Black population that is below the poverty line.
20%?
20%. The white population is 10% below the poverty line. Now we have 6 times as many people. Okay. But white poverty tends to be rural. Rural poverty is dispersed, where inner city poverty is concentrated. And so you're going to have some different problems, like problems with the police, that you're not going to have if you're in a rural community. So there are some differences, and some things are really the same. You see a lot of the same pathologies in all poor communities. But if we want to hone in on those who are really stuck, what does Perkins tell us? He tells us you have to totally change your heart. You have to want to live with people. You have to see your own brokenness and not be above them or judging them. You have to see that it's the agenda of the neighbors that matters for their neighborhood, not your agenda.
Yeah.
You have to. So he really hones in well on the commitment that you have to make. And then when you look at guys like Robert Lupton, who wrote the book Toxic Charity, are you guys familiar with that one?
No. Write it down.
Yeah, the other one, we should put these in the chat. There's such great books. Toxic Charity by Robert Lupton. And then the other one is Brian Fickert, who wrote When Helping Hurts.
How do you spell Fickert or Fickert?
F as in fun, Fikkert. And Brian Fickert runs the Chalmers Center. The Chalmers Center helps churches totally change their paradigm for philanthropy so that they are pursuing neighborhood stabilization, which is dignifying and transformative, as opposed to poverty tourism, which is undignifying and helps people get through till Tuesday, but doesn't transform their lives, right? Doesn't actually help them emerge from poverty. And so I'm part of an organization that follows this kind of model called Love the Lou here in St. Louis. We're on Enright Boulevard. And Love the Lou has been on Enright for 10 years. The street is absolutely gorgeous. We have community gardens. We have rehabbed homes. And these are the same neighbors living there, not different people. The same neighbors that were there 10 years ago. It's just beautiful now. And I know some of the students, and these students have older brothers and older cousins who have died, who have been shot, who have gone to prison, joined gangs, the whole 9 yards. And these kids are getting jobs, going to college, and really thriving in their lives. It is absolutely transformative if we come with a heart of love rather than this scientistic, let me send you a check in the mail and fix your problems that way, which is insane.
Yeah.
There's no way that's going to work.
That's exciting. And is that the neighborhood that's right off of just east of Delmar and
it's by Edsel and things like that too.
Yeah. So if you're coming down Van de Venner and you kind of pass Slough, right?
And then down further.
Yeah. Okay. And then you turn left onto Enright. I'm not remembering which ones are
Enright down there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's down there.
Charlie Bethel was just here today. And Charlie, he was took the helm of Kibbutz when it became
the inner city
ministry. And he was just musing about a couple of funerals he's had to be at recently. One was a natural death, which he was thankful for, and one was, of course, a murder, and that took place here in the city.
Right.
But he was talking about at this funeral, he was the only white guy, and I was there. No, this is this is the other funeral.
Oh, okay.
And that the kids. They're adults now. He said that he calls them kids. They're 40. Yeah. They're in their 40s. They were all murmuring, and they were like, "Say hey, that's Charlie," and they were all just talking about how great Charlie is. And the man conducting the service said, "Who are you?" And he said Charlie was told that he had made such an impact on these kids' lives, and many of them they're just doing well. Whereas, if you had looked at the statistics, it wasn't.
And that's the whole concept is personal presence. And actually, Bob Lupton in his workbook that he does on this, he uses the term right up front, shalom. Because what we want is the shalom of the neighborhood, right? Because shalom isn't just peace, it's wholeness. Right. It's a very holistic picture. And so you're not going to come into someone's life and fix one thing for them and solve their problems. There's a lot going on, and it's all interrelated. And so it has to be holistic.
Raphael Green, and we're going to have to end. I've got quite there 6:57. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I got 3 minutes.
No, we're doing okay.
3 minutes. I don't know how to count.
Yeah.
Raphael in his I was watching him
on his AfterGlow appearance.
Yeah. That it's not enough to, you have to take it beyond the civil rights movement. And you have to, mentality, and you have to take it into the kingdom of God. You have to really bring the presence of the church of Jesus in.
Right.
Not just, stamp a program on it. Yeah.
In the chat, Rachel, about 6:30, there's a person that said we're not now called brown people, and I think we need to respect those kind of things. But in terms of hierarchy, I think priorities. I think that Jesus made a big point when he was asked what's the greatest commandment. He answered with the Shema and the Havdalah, or about God's unity, and love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That's the most important. So I think it's important because that this person said we are now called brown people. I think it's important to respect what people want to be called, but I think it's really important to listen to the content of what you have been saying this whole time.
Thank you. I hope it's been helpful, and I would love it if people would engage with the book. And I also I do things like this all the time, little podcasts and things like that. So if you want to follow me on Twitter at Liberty Ethics, or friend me on Facebook, you can keep track of what I'm doing.
Great. And I'll put some of your links up. Rachel, before we go, what was the Robert Finkert book called?
Brian Fickert,
Brian Fickert.
Yeah, and I can actually type it into the chat right now. So Brian Fickert is When Helping Hurts. Okay. And then the other book is Robert Lupton, that's Toxic Charity. And he has others, Charity Detox. He keeps writing. He's in Atlanta with Focus Community Strategies, and then Brian Fickert runs the Chalmers Center. So these are all the same sort of neighborhood stabilization model.
Yeah.
And the other guy is Bob Woodson, Robert Woodson of the Woodson Center, who was a civil rights hero. And he, as was John Perkins, but he saw the whole movement turn towards government dependence, and he wanted economic independence. And so he really focuses on Black ownership and things like that.
Okay. Well, we're all going to have to go out and get the book. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. It's beyond generous of you to give us your time and your energy. And thank you so much. You've just are making a great contribution to the community. Thank you
so much. It was fun.
Oh, we could do for you too, Rachel.
Yeah. So
we love you guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
We're gonna say bye.
Okay. Bye. Have a good night.
You too.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
Yeshuati, Eftach